On a small, lonely island drifting in the expanse of the ocean, a young girl fills glass urns with water and clutches an egg, fully devoted to protecting whatever is inside. The girl knew not why she does this, yet she does all the same. She does not know whether the egg had something inside it, or whether whatever is inside had already died. But the girl moves with purpose, protected by her faith that the egg will hatch, because in her small island filled with darkness, the egg shone with hope. The angel's egg was her entire world. Alas, she is approached by a warrior who crushes the egg, shattering all of the illusions that it represented. What I just said, I might as well have told you the story of Genshin Impact. But to fully understand it, we must go back to where it all began. To tell you about the princess from Teyvat's greatest story ever told. This is the tale of the Pale Princess.
Waking world, you seem woven from the stuff of dreams. All shall fade away.
The dream lives on. These are the words spoken by Fischl's mother, the Kaiserin of the Immernachtreich, in the opening line of Mr. Nine's novel, Flowers for Princess Fischl. And they are powerful words indeed. In fact, so profound is that opening line that one could make an entire video based on it. In case you didn't get the memo, you're watching that video right now. You see, dreams are undoubtedly the most important thematic concept in all of Genshin. Now, I know that some of you are going to be skeptical of what I just said. Surely there must be more dominant themes to the story. But no, it unironically is dreams. Putting aside the symbolic depth and narrative value that they carry in Genshin's story and cosmology, which I will get into shortly, dreams impose a much more practical and tangible influence on one of the game's most vital elements. They govern visions. You see what I did there? Visions, games, elements, because, you know, visions and elements. No? Okay. So, as we learned during the Inazuma Arcane Quest, a vision is the manifestation of one's ambition. And ambition is just a fancy word for a specific goal that is accompanied by determination and intentionality to achieve a certain dream. Essentially speaking, your ambition is your dream, the dream you work to achieve. And into that, those with wills powerful enough to reach the heavens are looked upon favorably by the divine gaze, after which their ambition is rewarded by one of the 7 holders of the 7 authorities with a shard of divinity, a vision. As you are probably aware, Genshin Impact acts as an extended collection of fairy tales that are combined to make up Teyvat's mythos. For example, Volume 2 of the book series Fables de Fontaine talks about the story of the crow and the fox, which, as many of you know, is taken directly from a very famous children's fairy tale called The Fox and the Crow. We also have a witch named Alice who is explicitly referencing a fairy tale character from Charles Dodgson's Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. Mondstadt is a nation heavily influenced by Arthurian legends. The book 1,000 Nights is inspired by a collection of Middle Eastern folktales called 1001 Nights. Roman myths heavily influence Fontaine, while The Pale Princess and the 6 Pygmies is an intertextuality of Snow White and the 7 Dwarves. In that same vein, Amun, the Scarlet King, references another character from Alice Through the Looking Glass, who is called the Red King. What's interesting about the Red King is that he is depicted to be asleep, and the twist at the end of the story suggests that Alice Through the Looking Glass might have been all part of his dream. This is very important because Al-Ahmar, which in Arabic means the red, is one of the titles of Amun, who was a god infamous for his great dream in the Golden Slumber that contributed to the influx of forbidden knowledge into Teyvat, which Rukkhadevata had to later suppress. Furthermore, Amun loved a Sili called Nabu Malikata, who was a servant of the Moon's sisters before their demise in the calamity that took place after the Outlander from Beyond married the Pale Princess. Now, I know that the story states that the Outlander married the Seelie ancestor, however, they are both the same. You're gonna see why. In the Moonlit Bamboo Forest, it is written that the Moon Sisters, who were said to be the Sisters of the Night, shared an equal affection for one another and their one and only love, the morning stars. So we have the Moon Sisters, who were sovereigns over the night sky, and these three sisters shared equal love for the stars of daybreak. This affection that the Moon Sisters had towards the morning stars appears to have become a persistent motif throughout history following their death. Let me tell you how. The moon in Genshin is commonly associated with the color silver. The Moon Sisters drove the silver carriage across the night sky and resided in the lunar palace, which shone with silvery moonlight. On top of that, we have a god that is heavily associated with the moon, Paimon, and she is said to be silver by the Aranara. The Sisters of the Night loved the morning stars. And here it is worth noting that the morning stars are not actually stars, they are planets, either Venus or Mercury to be precise. And in the prequel video to this one, I talked about how Venus is the Roman name of the Greek goddess Aphrodite, who in turn is the equivalent of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. Whereas in Genshin, Ishtar is combined with the Ars Goetia demon Astaroth to form the name of Istaroth, who is the god of time and one of the shades of the primordial one. We know that the moon can be likened to a mirror that reflects the light of the sun. This mirror imagery is very important, so please keep it in mind. In the moonlit bamboo forest, it is written that the Moon Sisters loved the stars of daybreak. When I say the word star and daybreak in the same sentence, the first thing that should come to your mind is the sun. The sun is a star and it is responsible for daylight. Okay, earlier I mentioned how Amun is depicted as a sun, a star, and his lover Nabu Malikata was a Seelie, was a moon maiden. After all, the city of the Jinn, a race created by Nabu Malikata, was called Aykhanom, which translates to the city of the moon maiden. So what we end up with here is a moon maiden falling in love with a king that represents the sun, the star of daylight. And this is not the only example of such a union. In The Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, the Pale Princess, who is the ancestor of the Seelies, falls in love with the Prince of Light, which you can see right here. Furthermore, ignoring all these Vegas books that Hoyoverse uses to drip feed us lore, in our own game, and I really hope I'm not gonna blow anyone's mind here because this should be ultra common knowledge, it is abundantly clear that Paimon loves the Traveler. Throughout the events of the story, Paimon has been steadily growing more and more attached to the Traveler, and the writers at Hoyoverse are not shy at all to make it as obvious as possible, not only in their voice lines but also in the art conquests themselves. During Caribert, Paimon showcases a side of her that we rarely ever get to see. She asks the Traveler if they ever get tired of her and is obviously becoming weary of what would happen when the two siblings eventually reunite. I mean, just take a look at the description of this card. You might be only one of countless stars, but you're Paimon's whole world. And man, do you realize the implications of Paimon saying that the Traveler is her whole world? Aether and Lumine are trying to reunite and leave to that because in their own words, Outlanders do not belong to this world. But if one of the two siblings is Paimon's whole world, yeah, she ain't gonna let go. In fact, she explicitly says she won't multiple times across the story, the most recent of which is during the world quest with Caterpillar and Lenore, when she says that wherever the Traveler goes, he will take Paimon with him. You know what? There is something that I need to tell you about Paimon. Trust me, you have to know this. You know how the Traveler jokingly tells Paimon that she is a god of fish in one of their voice lines? I always wondered what Hoyoverse was implying by this, and I just recently found out where this reference is from, and holy shit, does it completely change your perspective on Genshin Impact. As I was editing this video, I discovered that Genshin Impact is inspired by a dream where a nameless boy in military uniform sees a giant sphere descending from a crimson-red sky into the sea. The sphere was made out of thousands of goddess statues, forming the shape of a titanic eye. Keep this eye in mind and remember the word Titanic. I am using it on purpose. The story I am talking about is a 1985 anime called Angel's Egg, which follows a nameless little girl who cares for an egg in an abandoned city. There, the girl meets a nameless boy in military garb carrying a cross on his shoulders, who inquires her about the contents of her egg, to which the girl refuses to answer. The story then cuts to a group of fishermen hunting shadows of fish. The men lob their harpoons at the swimming shadows but manage to only strike stone as the nameless pair watch them from a cathedral decorated with stained windows of fish. The two eventually travel together and come across the giant carcass of a deceased Leviathan, where the Leviathans are ancient sea dragons referenced in the Hebrew Bible. Neuvillette is one such example of a Leviathan. Beside the Leviathan's carcass, the nameless boy sees a pillar upon which is the carving of a great tree. And guess what? In Genshin, the name of the leyline tree, Irminsul, means the great pillar. The boy then recounts to the girl how in his dream he saw a similar tree which grew to hold a giant egg containing a sleeping bird. When the girl asks him about what the bird dreamt of, the boy flatly asks her again about the contents of her egg. The boy then recounts to the girl the biblical tale of Noah's Ark. And remember, Tevat, the world of Genshin Impact, is the Hebrew word for ark. However, in the boy's story, the doves that Noah sent never returned to the ark, and the people soon came to forget why they were sailing. The boy then asks the girl whether they themselves exist or if they are a mere dream like the sleeping bird in his memories. The girl then strongly insists to the boy that the bird exists, after which she takes him down a hallway filled with the fossils of lizards and sea monsters until they arrive at an eyrie displaying the skeleton of a great angelic bird. And I promise you, this imagery of the angelic bird is going to make so much sense when we get to Layla. The girl then reveals to the boy her intent to hatch the egg and return the divine bird back to the heavens, which he finds ridiculous and futile. Before I continue the story, I want to tell you that I am absolutely certain that these two, the boy and the girl, are Dainsleif and Paimon. I know that this is not the first time I mention this on my channel, but this time I am completely sure of it. You see, the nameless pair in the angel's egg are nameless because they suffer from amnesia. Whenever Paimon is asked about what she is, her immediate reply is a complete non-answer where she says Paimon is. Paimon. And at the start of the Fontaine Arcane quest, Paimon tells the traveler that before meeting them, all she remembers is feeling very dizzy before falling into a whirlpool. And when it comes to Dainsleif, I don't think I need to say anything, just listen to what he himself says.
My memory has all but faded completely, but I will always remember how much she too loved these flowers.
The she who Dane talks about is Ermin's daughter, Princess Fischl, the one from Mr. Nine's Flowers for Princess Fischl, where Dane would be Osvaldo, the captain of the Night Ravens, the captain of the Royal Guard, which means Dane was likely responsible for protecting the princess. When the girl drifts to sleep, the boy in military garb takes the angel's egg and smashes it with his cross, after which the entire city is drowned in a great flood. When the girl wakes up, the boy is nowhere to be found, and to her absolute horror, she sees the egg that she cared for so much broken and shattered, with the bird in it dead, never to be born and touch the heavens. And thus the bird that once dreamed of the sky was reduced to a mere memory in the mind of a nameless boy. Guys, I now have a very different point of view on Dainsleif. Dude, if Hoyoverse decides to replicate that exact same scene from the Angel's Egg, it is going to be wild. Oh my god, I can already imagine it. Also, when Dainsleif tells Halfdan that there is no need to revive the homeland, yeah, that line suddenly has a completely different meaning. Yikes, dude. I mean, his constellation is Ouroboros, so it does make sense, I guess. Anyway, the OVA doesn't end there, because after the girl finds the shattered egg, she runs after the boy into a dark forest, passing a giant tree holding an egg. In her haste, she falls into a ravine where she meets her reflection in the water. The girl then transforms into an adult woman with her final breath, releasing countless eggs that rise to the surface of the water. The scene then switches to a landscape covered with tree roots, holding the eggs of the divine bird, as the boy stands on a vast shore littered with white feathers, and sees the exact dream from his memories. A giant sphere rising from the sea. In Genshin, that's the crimson moon that devours the eclipse. The boy then notices a single difference from his dream: the figure of the girl sitting on a throne and caressing an angel's egg in her lap. The camera then zooms out to reveal that the beach, the city, and the forest where the story takes place are all part of a small, lonely island in the middle of a vast sea, appearing not unlike the hull of an overturned ship, an ark that lost its way, drifting in the expanse of the cosmic darkness. Oh, and by the way, the guy who made the angel's egg is Mamoru Oshii, who has a number of highly acclaimed titles under his belt, such as Urusei Yatsura, Ghost in a Shell, and Lupin III. So yeah, he's kind of a big deal in terms of cultural influence. Going back to Genshin, a lot of people say that Paimon could be evil and that she is manipulating the Traveler. Even the Abyss Lector Enjo warns the Traveler that a day will come when Paimon will betray him, and I would have to disagree. Paimon is not evil. Yet despite that, the Traveler will end up fighting her. That is inevitable. That is fate. A crimson moon in real life results from a phenomenon known as the lunar eclipse. Metaphorically speaking, it is the opposite of a solar eclipse, which conveniently was adopted by the Khaenri'ah eclipse dynasty, who were symbolized by the black sun. More on that later. On that note, the Eclipse dynasty was not the only bloodline that ruled Khaenri'ah. In fact, we know of at least one more bloodline that preceded the Eclipse, known as the Crimson Moon dynasty, while the total number should actually be 3 if we go by the Hilichurl tribes found in Dadaupa Gorge. In Genshin, water signifies chaos, and the sea is a metaphor for the Sea of Stars, while ocean is space. Hence why Paimon, who is a moon goddess, is considered a type of fish by the Traveler, while the Traveler themselves, along with the all-devouring narwhal, are called visitors from the far side of the Sea of Stars. Due to Khaenri'ah's proximity with space, things from beyond Teyvat would constantly leak into their kingdom, and their soldiers would wipe them out accordingly. However, the Crimson Moon dynasty founded an organization, an orphanage, to take in living children who came from beyond the so-called ocean, believing them to rival or even transcend the gods. One of these children, Perinheri, was forced to crawl through a dark chimney with no food. The preceptors of the organization regularly checked on him, asking if he died yet. And only when Perinheri saw the visage of a giant crimson moon in the sky that turns around to look at him, revealing itself to be a titanic, horrified eye, did he yell back that he was dead. After which the preceptors embraced him, saying, "You have traversed the fire of 2 worlds within the hearth, and here you are reborn." However, despite all the children they raised as super soldiers, the Crimson Moon dynasty was never successful at obtaining a descender from beyond the Sea of Stars. And that tells us a lot about the Crimson Moon, more than you might imagine at first. Based on Perinheri's account, the children of the Khaenri'ah orphanage had to meet the divine gaze of a titanic, horrified eye, the Crimson Moon, so that they may die and be reborn again in the fire of the heart. But remember, the orphanage's main goal was to procure a descender, someone like Aether and Lumine, one of the golden stars of daybreak which the Moon Sisters loved. Now, since the children of the orphanage were outlanders just like Aether and Lumine, but were not on the same level as the siblings to be classified as descenders, as golden stars, then that would make the children who met the gaze of the Crimson Moon red dwarves. And that makes so much sense. You see, red dwarfs are by far the smallest and most common main sequence stars in our galaxy, the Milky Way, which statistically explains why the Khaenri'ahs were able to capture so many of them, but not a single golden star. Coincidentally, so common are these red dwarfs that the founder of the Fetui, Piero, was able to put one in our game right now. Her name is Arlecchino. The Knave's constellation is called Ignis Purgatorius, which translates to purifying fire in Latin, which symbolizes the process of destruction, purification, and rebirth. And that is the exact same process which the Outlanders in the Conrian orphanage had to go through in order to die and meet the gaze of the titanic Crimson Moon, then be reborn in the fire of the hearth. And Arlecchino has all the hallmarks of someone who went through this process. First of all, her eyes are in the shape of 2 red X marks, quite literally signifying that she has died. Perinheri was reborn in the fire of the hearth, while Arlecchino's vision is Pyro, in addition to her being very crimson or red in general. The knave also leads a Sejnayan orphanage of her own, known as the House of the Hearth, where the children are turned into soldiers for the Fatui. This, in my opinion, speaks volumes for as to how the ideologies of the Crimson Moon dynasty have long outlived them, persisting even today through people like Piero and Arlecchino. Here, I do want to make a quick proposition. Although it is very likely that Arlecchino came from the Conrian orphanage, it is worth noting that she might not originally be from there and was rather found much later on by Piero. I say this mainly because of the time discrepancy between the Crimson Moon dynasty and the Eclipse dynasty. But what we know for certain is that she is an Outlander. Speaking of Outlanders, notice how Aether and Lumine are angels. Therefore, if the knave is a lesser version of them, a red dwarf, then it would make sense for her to be a lesser angel as well. This would certainly explain the angel wing motifs on her hair tie, along with all the crimson red eyes found across her clothes, resembling the eye of the Crimson Moon. But what is this eye of the Crimson Moon? Well, we know that the Crimson Moon is currently controlled by Celestia, but that was not always the case. Before them, it quote-unquote belonged to the aforementioned Crimson Moon dynasty of Kandria, indicating that the Crimson Moon is this primeval force that has existed on Teyvat for thousands of years, and it has to do with death and rebirth. An eye indicates vision, and interestingly enough, the visions that the people obtain when their ambitions catch the attention of the divine gaze are called the eyes of God. Nahida herself goes on to add that visions are eyes which the heavens use to peer into the mortal world. Now, from this cutscene right here, we know that visions are somewhat connected to star beasts, since the all-devouring Narwhal is Tartalia's constellation. Constellations dictate one's fate into that, and if the Moon Sisters, who loved the stars of daybreak, are anything to go by, then the Crimson Moon should also be related to fate. Which brings me to Rubido, red, the final stage of alchemy that produces the Philosopher's Stone, the power to transmute base metals into gold and silver, manipulate fate, and grant immortality. Thus, the Crimson Moon could very well be some kind of Philosopher's Stone that is currently controlled by the heavenly principles and their ilk in Celestia. I am not saying that this is absolutely the case, but it is certainly a possibility. Also, since we are discussing the Eye of the Crimson Moon, did you know that Princess Fischl is said to have had red eyes? This is very interesting because Fischl, as you'll see later in this video, is very likely Paimon. You see, when asked by the Traveler, Paimon jokingly calls herself the God of Protection. And for what it's worth, she is actually a god, just like how Amun is a god, and Hagentis, and Osail and Morax are also gods. And all of their names are taken from the Lesser Key of Solomon. We also know that she is yet another example of a lunar maiden that loves a golden star, just like how the Moon Sisters love the stars of daybreak. And interestingly enough, the Moon Sisters were sovereigns over the night sky, and they were daughters of prose and song. Even their names, aria, sonnet, and canon, are terminologies of music and poetry. They were also called Sisters of the Night, and since this video is all about dreams, we can't ignore the fact that night is when people go to sleep, and sleep is the realm of dreams. Therefore, if the Moon Sisters were sovereigns of the night sky illuminated by the stars, where the stars in this context represent the dreams and ambitions of the people, then the Moon Sisters must have also been rulers of dreams. Now, let me take you back to the quote spoken by Fischl's mother from the start of this video, where she says, "The dream lives on." The reason this quote is so important is because the person speaking that quote is the Empress of the Immernachtreich, the Empress of the Empire of Everlasting Night, and her husband, Fischl's father, is said to have been no mere shade. So if this guy is described to be both the emperor of an empire and not a mere shade, then the only logical conclusion would be that he is the king. And in the parable of the tree from before sun and moon, the king was the incarnation of the primordial one. Notice the symbol at the top left corner of the screen. That is the icon of the Paimon menu, and it depicts Paimon sleeping with her eyes closed. There are two interesting things to point out here. The first is that directly parallel to it in the top right corner, you will find an icon in the image of one of the many stars that the Moon Sisters loved, the Traveler. And do you remember how it is written that the Moon Sisters were daughters of prose and song? Well, that exact same icon of the Paimon menu can be found on this name card right here, where the description reads, "We parted in one melody and reunited in another." Genshin Impact's world is cyclical in nature. This is foreshadowed through the Samsara cycles of the Sumeru Arconquest, where the people were put to dream by the academia. A concept that is then brought up again in the Narcissus Ordo of Jacob Baker and René de Petrichor. Therefore, the Moon Sisters being deities of music and poetry is very significant, because music often follows repetitive patterns or cycles, with melodies and rhythms returning to certain themes or motifs. And we know that the Lunar Sisters cycled through the night sky until a great calamity laid ruins to the halls of the stars. But you know what? While talking about stars, fate, the Moon Sisters' dreams, and the night sky is cool and all, at the end of the day, I made this video for one reason and one reason alone. So let's talk about her. Let's talk about Layla. Before anyone gets too excited, I need to make one thing very clear. Layla is an almost completely ordinary girl. We know who she is, we know where she comes from, and we know what she does. There is nothing too special about Layla, precisely why I don't care about her, but rather who she represents. Although Layla is a normal student who belongs to the Rtawahist darshan of the academia, her design and lore are full, and I mean full to the brim, with a variety of references and allusions to Teyvat's ancient legends, especially those of the Seelies. And boy, I've been waiting to talk about this character for such a long time. You have no idea how excited I am right now. Get ready, we have a lot to go through. Alright, since we are going to be discussing the Seelies, let us start by listing out their most prominent features and attributes. Now, these are all things that I already mentioned in the past few minutes. However, just to make sure that we are all on the same page, here is what you need to know. The Seelies were first and foremost servants of the Moon Sisters. And from the description of Xiphos' moonlight, we know that the Moon Sisters were goddesses of fate and destiny. And through their connection with the Moon Sisters, the Seelies are immediately associated with stars in the night sky. Because remember, on Teyvat, people's destinies are governed by their constellations. More on that later. Seelies are also associated with music and singing. This is an important one. In their true form, they are also described to be pale like moonlight and exceedingly beautiful. The Seelies also reference angels, the servants of the Heavenly Father, God, and according to Nivelette, the Heavenly Father in Genshin is the High King of the Dragons, Nibelung. This is very fitting because the Seelies in their heyday used to be envoys of heaven, tasked with guiding humanity. Additionally, we know that some of them had golden eyes with piercing pupils. You're about to see why that's important. Okay, I just said that Seelies are connected to the stars and the night sky, where constellations dictate one's fate, which is very convenient because the most important thing about Layla is her constellation. You see, Layla's constellation is Lucinia, which is a genus of birds more commonly known as the Nightingales in English. They are renowned for their exceptional singing abilities and are often considered one of the most melodious and accomplished songbirds. While the Seelies and the Moon Sisters, as mentioned earlier, were divinities of song and music. Furthermore, in Taoism, which by the way is a Chinese religion that heavily influences Genshin, the singing of the nightingales is thought to bridge the gap between the mortal and immortal realms, symbolizing a connection between humanity and the divine. This makes the nightingale a type of guide, or should I say, an envoy of heaven. The nightingale is also a symbol of love in both Greek and Chinese mythologies, where in Greek mythology, the legendary musician Orpheus, in his pursuit to save his wife Eurydice from the underworld, played a song which he based on that of the nightingale. The song was so beautiful that it moved the god of the dead Hades so much that he allowed Eurydice to return to the world of the living, albeit briefly. In case you are wondering why I'm suddenly mentioning Orpheus, well, as it so happens to be, Genshin Impact is based on a specific branch of Greek mythology known as Orphic cosmology. That's where the primordial one, Thanes, comes from. And akin to their Greek counterparts, the nightingales in Chinese poetry are a symbol of mourning love, where their songs express the yearnings and longings of separated lovers. And this perfectly, and I mean perfectly, aligns with how the Seelies were cursed by heaven following the fall of the Moon Sisters and forbidden to love. One such example of that curse in action was with Nabu Malikata, a Seelie that perished shortly after she gave in to Amun's affection and confided with him the secrets of the stars and the abyss, warning him not to seek the master of the four shades. But as I said before, Amun and Nabu Malikata was but one iteration of a lunar maiden falling in love with a star. So I wonder if there is any other star that tried, or perhaps is currently trying, to bring back their long-lost moon. And you know what? Hold that thought, we'll get back to it. In the moonlit bamboo forest, the young boy is told about the Moon Sisters by a beautiful maiden bathed in moonlight. The lady had golden eyes with a piercing gaze and an attitude that the boy proclaims to be unbefitting of the Adepti. With such a description, that maiden is almost undoubtedly a Seelie. And yes, her having an attitude does actually matter, so keep it in mind. That Seelie is not the only example of one with golden eyes. You see, the Jinn are a species of elemental spirits created by Nabu Malikata. Therefore, it would be logical to assume that their appearance and abilities would in turn reflect those of their creator. In the House of Dana, the traveler finds a book called The Shepherd and the Magic Bottle. If you haven't read this story, then please do so, it is an important story. In that tale, the young boy finds a silver bottle which he unseals, after which he is met with an exceptionally beautiful maiden with amber eyes glinting like daggers. And amber is a color extremely close to gold, so that checks out. The maiden also had an affinity with the moonlight and boasted quite the nasty attitude, a lot more than the Seelie from the moonlit bamboo forest, by the way. The Jinni tells the boy of how in the first era, she once lived in a palace singing with the nightingales, singing with the Seelies, until a disaster came which brought ruin to all that which she loved. Interestingly, the Jinni herself is later equated with a nightingale, and she tells the boy that before he freed her from the bottle, she had grown to prefer drowning in the illusions of her dream rather than facing reality. Going back to Layla, you will notice that the aforementioned characteristics of the Seelies do describe her pretty well. She is quite pale, she is beautiful, although that one is hard to reasonably assess because everyone in Genshin looks the same, but whatever. She has golden eyes with sharp pupils, and just like the Seelies, she has an affinity towards the stars and the moon and the night sky. However, she is still missing one feature that I claimed to be important earlier: the attitude. After all, Layla is a very charming and polite young lady, and the manner of speech which the previous two Moon Maidens implore was far removed from her, right? Not quite, hold on, you will see. During the quest Ever Silent Stars, Layla informs the traveler that she is possessed by the Wisdom Seelie, which she considers to be a blessing from the stars. Whenever Layla goes to sleep from fatigue and exhaustion, this quote-unquote Wisdom Seelie takes over and completes all of Layla's tasks with meticulous accuracy. Layla also tells the traveler that according to legends, Seelies can create countless copies of themselves, which checks out with Nabu Malikata as she created the Jinn who are said to be in her image. Layla then adds that the Seelies can summon shooting stars to smite their enemies. And do you know who else summons stars in combat? Layla. Both Layla's elemental burst and elemental skill summon starlight slugs and shooting stars respectively, and her normal attack, here, look at this. Dude, she hits the enemies with a star. Point is, Layla is a character whose entire gimmick is related to sleep, dreams, and the night sky. In any case, most of what I just said is mainly to provide context for Layla's design, but at the end of the day, it's all just background knowledge, and I think the vast majority of you get the point by now. Layla is referencing the Seelies from Tevat's legends, so let's get to the main purpose of this video, because we are interested in a very specific Seelie. The most important Seelie, the Pale Princess. The Pale Princess is a character from a book called The Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, which the traveler and Lisa retrieve from an Abyss Order mage who claims it to contain a great secret about the heavens. The title of that book is obviously an allusion to a very famous Germanic fairy tale called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In that story, the evil queen inquires the slave in the mirror on who is the fairest one of all. When the slave in the mirror tells her that it is her stepdaughter Snow White, the queen plots to assassinate the princess. The assassination fails, so the evil queen takes the form of a witch and tricks Snow White into eating a poisoned apple, which causes the princess to fall into a deep sleep. The story is paralleled almost perfectly in Genshin, where the evil queen is the Night Mother. The slave in the mirror should be the serpent from the Battle Pass. Prince Florian is the Prince of Light, and Snow White is the Pale Princess. The only true point of contention are the Seven Dwarfs. Under normal conditions, it is a no-brainer for them to correlate to the Seven Archons. However, in Genshin, the dwarves are called the Six Pygmies, which means we are missing one. Except that's not necessarily a problem, because after Focalors executed herself and returned the authority of water to Nivelette, the number of the Archons became 6, not 7. But once again, this problem is multi-layered, because Focalors' execution took place in recent times, while the Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies is supposedly recounting a tale from Tevat's ancient history when the Lord of Geo was yet young. By that logic, not only should the number of the Archons not be 6, but the Archons themselves wouldn't exist to begin with. Remember that according to both Apep and Nivelette, both of whom are dragon sovereigns and therefore amongst the most reliable sources of information in the entire game, the Archons came about as a result of the Great War of Vengeance, when the High King of the Dragons, Nibelung, returned with forbidden knowledge and challenged Celestia in a war that brought the world itself to the brink of collapse. Following the battle, the Usurper King became severely wounded and lost the ability to suppress the world with absolute authority. Consequently, the king and the Night Mother carved the Gnosis out of the third Descender and handed them over to the 7 victors of the Archon War, which was incited to cover up the Primordial One's injury. In other words, the 7, let alone the 6, shouldn't have even been a thing during the time of the Pale Princess and the Moon Sisters. Unless what we are really dealing with here is not history, but rather memory. A dream. When discussing the Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, there is a common meme that a lot of players tend to reference in relation to the Six Pygmies, where they say, "The furtive pygmy, so easily forgotten." This meme comes from one of the most iconic video game series in history, Dark Souls, which was developed by the legendary Hidetaka Miyazaki and his team at From Software. And guys, I do not think that this is just a meme. Finally, we have reached the main point of this video. Just like in Genshin Impact, the world of Dark Souls was originally ruled by ancient dragons. Back then, the world was enshrouded in grey mist and great arc trees that reached the sky. This is also consistent with Genshin, because remember, before the Primordial One's arrival, the dragons lived in the elemental realm, which Tsumi describes to be a place of such high elemental energy concentration that if you don't have access to elemental sight, you would effectively be blind. And then there was fire, and with it came time, hope, and disparity, life and death, light and dark. Soon enough, a tribe of giants gathered around the first flame, and from it they inherited the Lord Souls. The 4 great souls were the soul of death, claimed by Nito, the soul of life, claimed by the Witch of Izalith and her daughters, then the soul of light, which was taken by Gwyn, the man who would eventually become the king of the gods. Much later on, the furtive pygmy would claim the soul of dark. While the others consolidated their souls into strength, the furtive pygmy split his up into countless fragments and gave them to his kin, With their newfound power, the lords challenged the ancient dragons and defeated them, commencing the rise of the Age of Fire, the head of which was the king of the gods, Gwyn, who came to be known as the Lord of Sunlight. In the meantime, the furtive pygmy chose to nurture the dark soul with his descendants, so that one day a dark lord would rise from amongst them and put an end to the Age of Fire. Humanity's usage of their dark soul eventually manifested the Abyss, which was a darkness that could grow and devour everything in its path. But despite its appearance, the Abyss was an ecosystem capable of creating life, as it was generated by one of the core components of the first flame, the Dark Soul. However, there was a catch. The Abyss was uninhabitable to all beings aligned with fire, including the gods, and only those with the Dark Soul, humanity, could walk in it freely. That, in combination with the prophecy of the Dark Lord, made Gwyn paranoid of humanity. And here, man, in case you are unfamiliar with Dark Souls, let me tell you something about Gwyn. This guy was a massive scammer and a rat. You see, the furtive pygmy divided his dark soul amongst humanity, and those who inherited the largest fragments became known as the Pygmy Kings. Gwyn, on the other hand, had 4 children. Those are the nameless king, Guinevere, Gwyndolin, and the youngest, Filianore. After the war with the dragons, Gwyn tricked the Pygmy Kings into an alliance, granting them the titles of lords and offering them the ringed city at the edge of the world. Gwyn then gave them his youngest daughter, Princess Filianore, promising her that one day he would return to her, which, surprise, surprise, was a promise he never fulfilled. Bro, I am telling you, this guy was such a massive rat. He scammed the Pygmy Kings and his own daughter at the same time. He is the literal definition of a rat. Anyway, when the Ashen One finally reaches her, Princess Filianore is found sleeping on a cracked egg that contains the darkness of the Abyss. The idea here is that Filianore acts as a goddess of preservation. She is the daughter of sunlight, and light manipulates time, while darkness, if we think in terms of dark matter, manipulates space. So the interaction between Filianore's light and the darkness in the egg is what creates the space-time barrier that shelters the ringed city from the fading of the first flame and preserves it. Earlier, while discussing Layla's constellation, the Nightingale, I mentioned Orpheus and how Genshin is inspired by Orphic cosmology. Well, in Orphic cosmology, Kronos and Ananke are said to have created the silver egg of the universe. Eventually, the silver egg cracked and Phanes emerged from the abyss, then gave birth to the universe. Now, I'm going to try and make this as concise as possible because I already explained this several times in my previous videos, so I do not want to waste too much time on it. Phanes' depiction in Greek mythology is akin to that of an angel, and angels in Genshin are the dragons and the Seelies. Now, Phanes means bringer of light, which is perfect because Lucifer, who I also equated with the primordial one, means light bringer. Phanes' daughter is Nyx, the goddess of night. That's the Night Mother, the queen of the kingdom of darkness. Additionally, Phanes has the zodiac constellation wheel around him, which is also present around the slave in the mirror, whom the evil queen, the Night Mother, consults before deciding to kill Snow White. This is perfect because earlier I talked about Mr. Nine's novel Flowers for Princess Fischl. I'm gonna have the timestamp on screen in case you don't remember. Mr. Nine says that Fischl's father is no mere shade. He is majestic and mighty and helps her dispel any doubt or confusion. So he is basically manipulating her. Now, in case you haven't seen part 1, which is unfortunately a really big problem in these types of videos, the entire hour-long theory basically boils down to King Ermin tearing down the Veil of Sin, which brought forth a group of star beasts similar to the all-devouring narwhal, one of which merged with Ermin to become the primordial one and changed history from that point onwards, with Fischl being King Ermin's daughter, the queen of the Kingdom of Darkness. Interestingly enough, Phanes is said to have emerged from the abyss, while the darkness in Princess Filianore's egg is that of the abyss, and her slumber upon the egg is what preserves the estate of the world in place. Additionally, in Before Sun and Moon, it is written that for the world to be created, the eggshell had to be broken. However, Phanes, the primordial one, used the eggshell to separate the universe and the microcosm of the world. I have made the claim that Layla represents the Pale Princess, and earlier in this video I talked about how what is happening in Tevat is a constant alteration of memory rather than history, hence why the 7 Archons are the 6 Pygmies in a book that, as Nicole describes it, tells the history of the future in the past. when Focalors had just recently executed herself. Here's what's going on. Just like how Layla represents the Pale Princess, Mondstadt's Amy represents Princess Fischl, Mr. Nine's Night Mother, and Amy is a girl gifted with a great imagination. So much so that she dreamt of an entire world with palaces, kings, queens, servants, knights, actors who make plays, and common folk who watch those plays unfold. But Amy's dream is not one that builds upon reality. It is one she made to escape reality. And the truth is, whether you like it or not, you can never escape reality. In Flowers for Princess Fischl, Mr. Nine talks about the Summer Night Gardens, where he says that those who are highly skilled in the magical arts, emphasis on magical arts, I'm gonna come back to it, will possess their own unique domains of consciousness. Their loves, hatreds, yearnings, jealousies, adherence, and passions of the soul will be stored there. The Traveler has come across several examples of such domains of consciousness in the story so far. Beelzebul's Plane of Euthymia is one such domain. There is also Baa's Domain of Consciousness, where the sacred Sakura was first planted before it was superimposed onto Tevat. But here's the catch. The abodes of the Adepti, including the Serenity Pot, are also domains of consciousness. According to Ping, the Adepti learned the art of subspace creation from the Lord of Geo himself. And she goes on to make it clear that the domains of the Adepti are but crude imitations of Morax's true might. We get to see a fraction of this power when Morax, while standing on top of a hill on the surface, reaches into the chasm, through the ruined city, through the abyssal corruption, into the divine nail, then through the subspace of the fantastic compass, and pulls Xiao out back into the surface. It is a testament to Zhongli's power over the imaginary force, the power of dreams. Oh, and in case you are skeptical about whether the imaginary force exists within the confines of Tevat, well, we have Pneuma energy in Genshin, and Pneuma means creative force. Creativity requires imagination, and imagination forms dreams. So yeah, there's that. At any rate, remember that only those highly skilled in the magical arts will possess domains of consciousness. And according to the Adeptus Fujin in Chenyu Vale, she is not strong enough to create her own adeptal abode, like the other Adepti of the South. And based on Madame Ping, even the Adepti who can make their own domains are only imitating the power of Rex Lapis. Now we know that the sky of Tevat is fake. We also know that the Primordial One used the eggshell to separate Tevat from the rest of the universe. This means that the eggshell can only be the false sky. The symbolism embedded in Princess Filianore's slumber atop the abyssal egg, preserving the world within her dream, holds profound significance for several compelling reasons. During an interview, Miyazaki disclosed that the inspiration behind Princess Filianore's design traces back to the Angel's Egg OVA, which I talked about earlier in this video. And that exact same imagery holds an enormous presence in Genshin. Let me ask you this. What is Layla's primary role in terms of gameplay? She is a shielder. She puts a shield around herself that protects her and her allies during combat. That's the purpose of a shield. It is a shell that isolates what's inside it and protects it from harm, just like an eggshell. Now remember that Layla's constellation is Lucinia, the Nightingale. And based on the words of the Jinni from the Shepherd and the Magic Bottle, we made the correlation between the Nightingales and the Seelies, who are angels, meaning that the Nightingales are an angelic bird, or to put it plain and simple, Layla herself is an angelic bird inside an egg. This is the Pale Princess, sound asleep, dreaming of a new world. However, it is definitely worth mentioning that Layla might not necessarily be the Pale Princess. Alternatively, she could be based on the Primordial One itself. After all, both Layla and the Primordial One have angelic motifs through their association with divine birds. Both also lay dormant within an egg or a shell from which they hatch or awake. What I find peculiar, and what certainly supports this theory the most, is that when Layla sleeps inside her shell, you can see 4 shining stars that form around her, very reminiscent of the Primordial One's 4 shining shades. Taking into account the angel's egg, it would make sense for Layla to actually be representing the primordial one, the sleeping bird inside the egg of the nameless girl. And considering the strong possibility that the girl is Paimon, then Paimon would be nurturing that egg, nurturing a golden star so that it may one day reach fruition and ascend to the throne of divinity. This would also make sense from Dainsleif's perspective, as the one who wishes to free humanity, as the one who wishes to challenge the gods with power from beyond. It would be fitting for him to kill the bird before it can have the chance to become a true god, to prevent it from subjugating humanity. Surprisingly, from this point of view, Dain would be a tragic and heroic figure, while the nameless girl would be a naive fool, raising a calamity that would bring destruction upon the world. Nonetheless, please do keep in mind that this is just one possibility. Layla could be the sleeping bird, but she might as well be the Pale Princess, which I spent the entirety of this video arguing in favor of. And while there are certainly strong arguments supporting both versions of the story, I am currently leaning more towards Layla being the Pale Princess. And of course, when I say Layla, I am using her as a proxy for Paimon. If you watched part 1, then you know that there is more to the story of the primordial one than just the nameless girl and her egg. Obviously, there is King Ermin, who summoned the Traveler siblings to Conria in the first place. And then there are the Star Beasts mentioned by Mr. 9. And speaking of Star Beasts, the egg that the nameless girl cares for in Genshin might be that of a Star Beast, or a young Star Beast in of itself. However, we still have a problem, a really big problem, one that I've ignored on purpose throughout this video. I've been saying that Layla is the Pale Princess, which I have provided a very reasonable amount of explanation for. But Layla, the word Layla, her name, translates directly from Arabic to night, as in the Night Mother. Now, normally this would not be a problem at all, because characters can easily represent various other characters in their design. Except in this particular situation, it is a problem, since the Night Mother and the Pale Princess are two different characters from the exact same story. And on top of that, I already made it clear in part 1 that Amy is supposed to be the character representing the Night Mother, not Layla, not the Pale Princess. Unless what's going on here is that the Night Mother is the Pale Princess from the future. You see, at the end of Layla's hangout quest Ever Silent Stars, it is revealed that Layla is the Wisdom Seelie. Once again, I'm not saying that Layla herself is a Seelie, we are talking symbolically here. And earlier in this video, I told you to keep in mind something very important about the Seelies, which is the fact that they have a very sassy attitude. Now, Layla herself is a very gentle girl. She is polite, kind, just like Filianore. All characteristics of the Pale Princess. However, due to her unconfrontational nature, Layla also holds herself back from many things. So when she sleeps, her deepest desires come alive and take over. That part of her is witty, brave, and absolutely not shy to point out the shortcomings of the people she does not like. And when Layla wakes up and finds all of the papers completed, she cannot fathom herself to have written all of that work with such pristine perfection, and more importantly, with such direct and vulgar criticism of the teacher's mistakes. Now, do keep in mind that this story is told from Layla's point of view, and knowing how Layla is, the word stupid is probably the peak of barbarism and vulgarity in her eyes. At any rate, the main takeaway from all of this is that the Wisdom Seelie and Layla are both opposite reflections of the same person. Yet no matter which side of her is in control at that moment, the part that is Layla always remains. But Layla is not unique in this situation. Amy is also a girl with two different personalities. There is the normal Mondstadian girl Amy who likes books and libraries, and then there is Fischl, this dream, this Prinzessin der Verurteilung that she envisions in her mind. While Layla's dream is a sleeping one, Fischl's is a daydream. And speaking of daydreams, let me take you back to the quote by Fischl's mother that started this entire video. The dream lives on. That is actually not the full quote. Mr. 9 goes on to write that when the universe reaches its end and all things flow back into the Empire of Everlasting Night, Fischl's mother speaks another line. Find meaning somewhere. The night deepens. find meaning somewhere. The night deepens, but the dream lives on. That line can be interpreted in several ways. However, it is likely Fischl's mother telling her daughter to wake up from that futile delusion. The night deepens, yet her dream lives on. She needs to wake up from her sleep. She needs to break from her egg and find meaning elsewhere. When Mr. Nine talks about Fischl's mother, he makes a very interesting statement. Mr. Nine writes, "Quite a few of the finer points of the tale have caused people to wonder if the Kaiserin of the Immernachtreich once experienced all that Fischl has. Fischl's father is undoubtedly not a mere shade. He is majestic and mighty, and helps Fischl to dispel her confusions. As for Fischl's mother, the Kaiserin, her actions and deeds show her to have quite the interesting character indeed." In case you missed it, Mr. Nine hints at Fischl's mother having experienced all that Fischl has. And when you take a look at the Pale Princess and the 6 Pygmies, not 7 Archons, a book that is supposedly telling the history of the future in the past, we now have the answer to what Genshin Impact is. Genshin Impact was officially released on September 28, 2020, which was exactly 9 years after Hoyoverse's first ever official game, Fly Me to the Moon, came out. Yes, I know that there is the Legend of Saha, but that one was made by Tsai Hao-yu on his own. Fly Me to the Moon is Hoyoverse's first official game. This 9-year gap is where the pen name of the author of Flowers for Princess Fischl and the Legend of the Shattered Halberd, Mr. Nine, comes from. And the protagonist of that game is none other than Kiana Kaslana. In that game, Kiana is a witch whose goal is to find the eclipse, so that she may bring back the moon and restore her father's name and honor. I repeat, she is a witch trying to find the eclipse that her father once sought. The reason her being a witch is important is because when Mr. Nine talks about the Summer Night Gardens, he says that those skilled enough in the magical arts are the ones who can create their own domains of consciousness. And Fischl's father, King Ermin, was the king of the Eclipse dynasty. And in the prequel to this video, I suggested that King Ermin is Fischl's father. I also suggested that Genshin Impact's Ermin is the counterpart to Honkai Impact's Apocalypse, who is technically Kiana Kaslana's father. But it goes even deeper than what you might imagine. You see, in Liyue, there is a man called Chang the Ninth, who is a novelist who wants to restore the honor and name of his family, just like Kiana. He appears as a prominent character in Xingqiu's story quest Bookworm Swordsman. Chang the Ninth used to live near a girl called Little Nine who died a long time ago. And Little Nine referred to Chang as Big Nine. The two nines sat together as Little Nine enjoyed the stories told to her by Big Nine. I am not done. This goes much deeper than you think. At the end of Luocha's companion mission in Honkai Star Rail, A Night Stranger, he leaves behind a letter where he spoils the ending to one of the novels that he read, where he talks about how the real killer in the story was Chang Hong, the nephew of Chang the Ninth. And as you all know, Luocha is Honkai Star Rail's Apocalypse. During Bookworm Swordsman, the Traveler and Xingqiu obtained the final volume of the Legend of the Shattered Halberd from Chang the Ninth. And in the Legend of the Shattered Halberd, the most important of all the nines, Mr. Nine, reveals that the first divine halberd, Ermin, once pierced the Axis Mundi and united the 9 realms. And the reason we know that Kiana Kaslana from Fly Me to the Moon is Paimon is because Hoyoverse already told us that she is. You see, a long time ago, Hoyoverse made a side account to Genshin Impact's Twitter called Ella Musk to try and convince Elon Musk to play Genshin before Elon bought Twitter and rebranded it to X. And the handle of that account is called Paimon to the Moon. If you don't believe me, if you still don't believe me, the game Fly Me to the Moon has Kiana go through 60 levels before she can reach the eclipse and restore her father's honor. And Paimon's birthday in Genshin Impact is June 1st, or to put it more clearly, 6/1/61. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Genshin Impact. It is a story inspired by Mamoru Oshii's Angel's Egg that acts as the spiritual successor to Hoyoverse's first ever games, The Legend of Saha and Fly Me to the Moon. But we are not done yet. There is still more. Remember that I said Layla is the Pale Princess, and the Pale Princess resembles Princess Filianore in her slumber upon the egg of the abyss, from which Thanes in Greek mythology was born. Now Filianore's father is Gwen, who is the god of sunlight. What's crazy is that the Eclipse dynasty of Kandria is symbolized by the black sun. And in Honkai Star Rail, when Luocha spoils the detective novel, he writes that the killer is Chang Hong, the nephew of Chang the Ninth, and the name Chang in Chinese means sunlight. So Luocha actually spoiled the ending of Genshin Impact. Luocha is saying that Dainsleif, the nephew of King Ermin, is going to turn out to be the real killer. He is the one who shattered the egg of the divine bird before it could be born into the world and broke the heart of the princess. This explains why the self-proclaimed prophet in Dainsleif's introduction asks him whether that strand of blonde hair is someone he must kill or the object of his penitence. Man, this is crazy. By the way, I have more to say about this, but let's wrap things up with the Pale Princess so we can move on. Mr. Nine suggests that Fischl's mother once experienced all that Fischl has. Using that logic, we can surmise that the two had similar journeys across their lives. And as we discussed earlier, both Amy and Layla have dual personalities. And because they are both supposed to represent the Pale Princess, Princess Fischl, then it wouldn't be outlandish to say that Fischl also has two different personas, each corresponding to a different memory of who she is, not a different time of her life, a different memory. The story of the Angel's Egg deals with the perception of reality. When the nameless boy, who in Genshin is supposed to be Dainsleif, tells the girl about how the sleeping bird in his dream only exists in his memory, the girl reassures him that the sleeping bird is real, and she shows him proof of that. She shows him the skeleton of the angelic bird and tells him that she wishes for the bird in the egg to hatch so that it may live, so that it may exist. From that perspective, the egg which the girl held represents hope. It represents potential, that the boy was wrong, that the sleeping bird was not a mere figment of his imagination, but rather something that truly exists. However, when the boy smashes the egg and the girl drowns and dies, what he said about the bird being nothing more than a figment of his imagination might as well have been the truth. The sleeping bird was never given the chance to wake up and see the world, and the only person who remembers the bird, the little girl, died. So as far as the boy is concerned, he was right. The sleeping bird on top of the great tree was never real. It only ever existed in his dream, because no one will ever remember the bird. Except the nameless boy is wrong. The sleeping bird did exist. The boy was simply a coward who smashed the egg, stripping the sleeping bird of the chance to hatch and see the world. And when the sphere from the boy's memory rises from the sea to the sky, it adorns a feature that was never in his memories. The figure of a girl sitting serenely on the throne with the angel's egg in her lap. A reminder that the bird was always real. Thus, Chang Hong, the nephew of Chang the Ninth, Dainsleif of the Eclipse dynasty, the nephew of King Ermin, the Twilight Sword, Ouroboros, is the man who broke the egg and shattered time. To translate what I just said into English, it appears that some of the Khaenri'ahn stole the Genesis Pearl from the Dragon King Nibelung and then used it to completely change how history is remembered, so thoroughly to the point where they became the masters of Tevat. The story of Vera's melancholy tells of a king who offered his daughter the throne of the kingdom while he went to sleep, and she rules the kingdom accordingly until the day her father wakes up and returns. The girl is Paimon, who is the Pale Princess, who is Princess Fischl. However, it seems that at some point she was deceived and forgot the memory of her father and her noble origins, becoming the Night Mother, the Queen of the Kingdom of Darkness. And if we go based on the theme established in Dark Souls, then the Pale Princess, who is Paimon, would be the daughter of the God of Sunlight, the King of the Gods, the Primordial One, who is using her to forestall the end of the world, just like how Gwyn used Filianore to delay the inevitable demise of his cherished Age of Fire, even if but for a moment. Layla's name card, called Daydream, reads as follows: "The starry sky in your dreams will illuminate your way forward, on the premise that the crystal in your heart reflects clear lights." This starry sky is the false sky. It represents fate, while the crystal that reflects clear lights is a vision. And if Tivat is isolated within the shell of the false sky, inside the Night Mother's egg, then the princess would be the master of the dream, and all the dreams of the people would belong to her. Their ambitions, their visions, all belong to her. At the start of this video, I talked about how dreams are fundamental to reality. That much is true. To create, we must first imagine, and for a creation to exist, it must start in a dream. Someone must have lit the first fire, someone must have sharpened the first spear, someone must have built the first house. Every invention that you see around you, every story that you read was once an idea in the mind of its creator. Every creation was once a dream. Dreams give life, so long as they build upon reality. For a dream that is used to escape reality is nothing short of a nightmare. An illusion made from walls of paper, an attempt to forget that what lies beyond will one day knock those walls down. And the truth about escaping reality is that you don't. It is a war that you must fight. And the longer you run from it, the greater your chance to lose. If you win, you live. If you lose, you die. And if you don't fight, you lose. So you must always fight. This has already been foreshadowed before with the dream Samsaras of the Sumeru Archon quest, where the people of Sumeru were trapped in a dream with Nilou, who represents the mistress of dreams, Nabu Malikata, being the host. And only when Nilou awoke from that dream could the people finally be freed from that cycle. However, there is a huge difference between Nilou and Paimon. Nilou never wished to escape reality. She never wanted to trap the people in her dream. And the moment she realizes what is going on, she immediately and willingly wakes up and lets the people free. But Paimon, the Jinni in the magic bottle puts it best. She has become like a chick struggling to break through its egg that has hopelessly fallen in love with a barren and ravaged world and its cycle of life and death. Like I said earlier, the Traveler is Paimon's world. And when the time comes for her to finally wake up, well, there is no other choice actually. Whether she likes it or not, she will return the dreams to the people. Or to put it in more appropriate language, she will return the world she stole back to the dragons. Now, if you are wondering how we will break free from the princess's dream, we actually have a very good idea of how to do so. And it has to do with Amun's golden slumber. You see, Amun created the golden slumber as a way to defy the heavenly order, an attempt to break free from the shackles of the world. The golden slumber he made, where 1,000,000 minds merged into one, was supposed to counteract the dream of the princess by forcing as many people as possible to accept forbidden knowledge, to accept reality, all at the same time, and therefore change history. Because remember, if the master of the dream is the Pale Princess, then whatever the princess herself believes is going to automatically become a historical fact in the mind of everyone living in her dream. She is the god of that world. The dreams of the people belong to her, and Deshret tried to give as many people as possible access to knowledge from beyond the false sky, knowledge from beyond the eggshell of the princess, so that their minds combined can counteract the princess's imposed will upon the world. And to be honest, it was an ingenious plan. Like seriously, it was a very good idea. However, Amun made one critical mistake. He was the master of the golden slumber, yet he too was part of the princess's dream. And the princess rejected his forbidden knowledge so much that it became a blight and a curse upon the people. But there is another smarter way to go about it, and we got to see that method in Al-Haytham's first story quest. In that quest, Al-Haytham's former colleague Siraj uses the students of the academia as test subjects to create a hive mind where he would be the master of the dream. So look what Al-Haytham does. He doesn't go after Siraj and try to force the people out of the dream and back into reality. Instead, Al-Haytham slowly implants memories in the minds of the dreamers that weren't supposed to originally be there. And then the minds of the people began to steadily change without Siraj himself noticing it. And if enough people believe something all at the same time, it becomes the truth. In the end, the people began to wake up from Siraj's hive mind and the entire thing collapsed on itself. That is how we will break from Paimon's dream. And the person who has to do it is the Traveler, because the Traveler, just like the all-devouring Narwhal, is an alien to Tevat. Therefore, they are not subject to the laws of Irminsul or the heavenly principles, making them the perfect candidate to implant those subtle memories and shatter the illusions of the tyrants holding them down. This explains why both Dainsleif and Rheindotter talk about unfulfilled dreams and the dreams yet to be dreamt. It also explains why the Black Serpent Knight Igetho says the following when they see the Traveler. Companion of that tyrant fate, the Traveler known as Calamity. The Great Calamity which led to the demise of the Moon Sisters took place shortly after the union of the Seelie ancestor with the Traveler from beyond, where it is heavily implied that the disaster was a result of a great betrayal by humanity. We know this because the Seelies were beautiful servants of the Moon Sisters tasked with guiding humans. And in the book, A Drunkard's Tale, one of the Seelies sings a song that her people wrote for the human savages. Yet now, she sings it to mourn their own fate. The way the Seelie refers to the humans as savages suggests some level of disdain and hatred towards them. And this makes a lot of sense because in the 4 opera cycles, the Ring of Nibelung, which by the way, the opera is a form of musical art, so that's very relevant to what we are talking about. A dwarf named Albrecht steals a golden treasure from the 3 Rhine maidens, the 3 Moon Sisters, and uses it to forge a great magical ring that grants him control over the world and its inhabitants. This is very interesting because Kaya, who is a descendant of the Conrian house of Albrecht, gives the Traveler a golden intaglio with a blood-red jewel inscribed into it towards the end of his hangout quest. Let us focus on the blood-red jewel as it is supposed to symbolize destiny, and red, as I already said many times in my previous videos, is the color of Rubidoux, the final stage of alchemy, and the production of the Philosopher's Stone, the power to transmute base metals into gold and silver, manipulate fate, and grant immortality. Red is also the name of Amun, the Scarlet King. It is also the color of the crimson moon that devours the eclipse of Khaenri'ah. And most importantly, it is the color that symbolizes the power of Celestia as seen in the Battle Pass and with the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles. This explains why Amun is always depicted as a divine eye in the sky. If the eye of the crimson moon mentioned in Perinheri indeed symbolizes the eye of the Night Mother, the god of fate, then Amun, who was a god that attempted to break free from the heavenly principles and overthrow the authority of the Night Mother, would also create his own celestial eye to replace hers, metaphorically speaking, of course. And the thing about Amun is, we probably haven't seen the last of him yet. If he is indeed supposed to be the Red King from Alice Through the Looking Glass, then Al-Ahmar's story might be far from over. You see, in Germany there is a legend about the medieval Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I, commonly known as Barbarossa, which means the red beard. The legend suggests that Barbarossa is not dead, but asleep in a hidden chamber, and when the ravens cease to fly around the mountains where he sleeps, he will awaken and restore Germany to its former glory. considering the tremendous amount of power he held during his life when he was legitimately called the Master of the Seven Elements. That alone tells you all you need to know, along with his close relationship with the avatar of Irminsul herself, Boer. There is a chance that Hoyoverse are setting something up with him in the future. In addition to everything I said, we know that Amun spent a great deal of time researching Tevat's primordial energies, and underneath his mausoleum you will find the Duat Hall, where Duat is the ancient Egyptian realm of the dead, and his name, the Red, gives him some level of connection with Rubidu, the Philosopher's Stone. But what makes the Philosopher's Stone so interesting is the fact that human souls are a core component for its creation. And going back to Al-Haytham's first story quest, do you notice what color Siraj's dream realm turns into when the people revolt against his will? Red. And red is not only the final stage of alchemy, but it is also the final stage of this video, because goddamn I need to stop making these long-ass movies. They take so much time to produce, but at any rate, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it useful in some capacity. Instead of a traditional outro, I want to leave you all with a really beautiful story that is very relevant to what we talked about. I didn't really know where to put it in the video, so I decided to leave it as food for thought in the end. The story is taken from Volume 5 of the book series A Thousand Nights. It is the tale of the mirror, the palace, and the dreamer. In that tale, a young girl dreamed of a beautiful distant palace in a faraway land. The king of that palace had spent 206 years to build it, and when the king sat on the throne of his palace, he could look into any mirror and from it see every corner of his realm. When the girl tried to look into the king's mirrors, all she could see was the blurry image of a masked young woman garbed in fine raiments wearing lovely ornaments. At that moment, the young girl knew her purpose. She wanted to seek an audience with the king and tell him something. Night after night, year after year, the girl would try and fail to find a way to the throne, nor would she ever witness that king in person. By that point, the young lady lost amongst the mirrors had become a famed magician, renowned across the land. One day, the girl found a way to reach the distant kingdom in her dreams, after which she immediately forsook all worldly things and went to meet the king. But when she finally reaches her destination, she finds out that the city had been annihilated in a terrible fire a few years ago, and the once prosperous kingdom was no more. The girl walked across the devastated palace, surrounded by shattered mirrors and empty halls. Sitting on the vacant throne, she peered into one of the mirrors that still stood, and saw yet again that masked lady standing in the opulent halls of the king's palace, surrounded by his mirrors, mirrors reflecting 1,000 reflections of her form. Then the magician turned to see the masked lady standing before her, gazing down upon her with unimaginable pain in her eyes. But before the magician could say anything, the masked woman took a dagger and stabbed the magician on her throne. Flames ignited the halls of the king once more as the magician smiled with confusion, astonishment, and relief for the woman, then took off her mask, revealing the features of the dying mage herself. This time, the mage could finally hear the other person's words that had become lost across the decades and centuries within the labyrinth of her dreams. It was a story told by her to herself, a story reflected in thousands of shattered silvers of silver, echoing on and on forever. At this point in the video, I think most of you understand what's going on in this story and what implications it has. And if you don't, well, don't worry about it. You will in a few years. Going back briefly to Dark Souls 3, when the Ashen One approaches Filianore to touch her broken egg, she wakes up from her sleep, and then immediately the Ashen One is transported into a desolate land with the world itself in complete ruin. Then it is revealed that the ringed city was an illusion created by Filianore's dreams, and when she wakes up to reality, just like that, the dream fades away and only Filianore's shriveled corpse can be seen, peering at the shattered shell of her cherished egg. The end of Princess Filianore is a sad one, a fate completely out of her control brought about by her father's greed and paranoia, as she slept and waited for his return. Thus, I can only hope that the Pale Princess won't meet the same end. However, if you made it this far, then do not let this video distract you from the fact that the princess holding the world hostage is but a mere slave to an even greater tyrant. And unlike Gwyn, who never returned to Filianore, Fischl's father, the Celestial Emperor, does come back at the end of the Legend of the Shattered Halberd, with the howling of the wind and the claps of thunder welcoming his return. And when the usurper king, the primordial one, does return, the dream will end and the real war will begin.